So, warmly welcome to this celebration of World Food Day 2020, organized by the Swedish FAO Committee. The theme for today's and the year's event of FAO World Food Day is Grow, Nourish, Sustain Together. And we have a list of people who will make presentations and that you will also have the chance to interact with at the end of this seminar. The seminar will begin with State Secretary Per Callenberg making an intervention, and thereafter we will move on to the Chief Economist of FAO, Maximo Torero. After that, we will have a series of intervention from private sector, public sector, as well as civil society, discussing this quite broad topic from their perspective. And we ask people to depart from the extreme challenges that we're facing right now, with the worst hunger disaster that the world has faced in 50 years going on, but also focus on the solutions, what we are doing to face these challenges and overcome them together. At the end of the seminar, we will have a short panel discussion, and feel free to pose questions during the presentations in the chat function, and we will collect them and then ask them during the panel discussions. And it might be that we won't be able to answer all the questions in the panel, but SIANI has promised to make their best to try to collect the answers of the questions not answered and publish them on their website. So if your question is not answered during the panel, please check the SIANI website out at the end of next week. So with this, I hope that I can leave the floor to State Secretary Per Callenberg to give you an introductory note.
Yes, you can, Kajsa, and thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, as State Secretary to the Minister for Rural Affairs, Jenny Nilsson, and perhaps more importantly, as chair of the Swedish FAO Committee, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this virtual seminar for the celebration of the World Food Day and the FAO's 75th birthday. A great event indeed. Grow, Nourish, Sustain Together, the theme of this year's celebrations. I think it perfectly summarizes the task we have before us. And I would like to begin by quoting the following. On this World Food Day, the basic question I think we must ask is, why are people starving in a world full of food? We must point out the relation of war and hunger. Most hunger catastrophes that have struck the globe during the latter decades have been caused or aggravated by armed conflict. Climate, in combination with too extensive a utilization of soils and forests, are causing erosion and other damages, and negative development that has to be reversed before it's too late. And what happens then after a year of bad crop conditions? Food that is imported or produced in other parts of the country may be available, but our poor farmer has no purchasing power and he has no money to buy his food. And these quotes, they could have come from a speech read, for example, last week on World Food Day 2020, but they were not. They are much older than that. They are taken from a speech held 40 years ago on the third World Food Day celebrations in 1983. And the speech was held by the Swedish Prime Minister then, Mr. Olof Palme. And I think it's indeed shocking how little has changed when you hear these words, and how accurately these words describe the situation that we are in today. So what do we conclude from this? Do we just give up? Do we shrug our shoulders and say there's no point in fighting because things change too slowly? And I think that's would be a very poor conclusion. I think even if this analysis is made 40 years ago in this speech, much has been accomplished since then. not at least but by the FAO, the only global organization for agriculture, forestry and fisheries, which is crucial for securing food security globally. And we thank the FAO for this. But I think this speech from Olof Palme provides us with a very important perspective, and it gives us the opportunity to think, if we go 40 years ahead from now and look back, what will they say then about what we did today? And I think there's hope. And I definitely hope that they will talk about this time as a time of transformation. With the 2030 agenda and the Paris Agreement, with the increasing interconnectedness, which we probably only have seen the beginning of the interconnectedness of the whole world through digital means. Not so much today by travel and trade, perhaps. Trade has been around for many hundreds of years, but the digital integration of the different parts of the world is definitely a game changer. But we also see integration, increased level of research and development, and increased development of innovations, not only technological. And we do see, I think, an emerging understanding that we need a systems approach. For instance, this is reflected in the World Food System Summit that's coming up. And I think perhaps this may be something that can start now and be seen for the coming 40 years. And if this happens, this time that we are in now will definitely be described as a turning point when it comes to these issues. Also, when we look at the current times in the future, I think the COVID-19 pandemic has to be mentioned. And as devastating as it may be, it does indeed show that humans can and will accept change. And it gives us the opportunity to be bold and to build back better and build back greener. And Sweden is committed, and my government is committed to do our part, both as an individual country and as members of the European Union and as believers in the multilateral system. We continue to be one of the largest donors to the United Nations, with the FAO included, and we work constructively to scale up the EU's commitments. And only yesterday, as one of many examples, the government decided to allocate another 50 million Swedish kronor to our development agency, SIDA, for their work specifically on food security. And the much needed attention globally to this increasingly important issue, but often forgotten issue, I must say, has now been given through the Nobel Peace Prize, through the Prize to the World Food Programme. And we are truly happy for this. And this is probably also another sign of the change that is coming. So to end my speech here in the beginning, I'd like to yet again quote Prime Minister Palme once more with the words, "Words and slogans, however well formulated, will not aid the world from hunger. They cannot feed a starving child. What we can do and do now is to start a practical work for food reforms. On this, all nations should be able to cooperate. And behind this endeavor lies a feeling of responsibility and involvement." Very well put, I think. And with these words, I wish you a successful and solutions-oriented seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Callenberg. I would just like to ask you one question. You mentioned the Food System Summit. Could you just elaborate a little bit on the Swedish government's views and position in regards to this? I guess many of us are curious about that.
Yes, yes, I can. We are very engaged in this meeting and the preparations for it, and we have a close dialogue with the summit secretariat. So. And the discussion is all about how can we, from Sweden's side, contribute as much as possible. And I think it's important to note that the summit is not only about the actual summit. It's perhaps even more important to focus on what can we do before the summit to prepare and to set the agenda, and also, of course, how can we harness the results from the summit and for the work forward. So we work with this whole process right now, and we try to push for the systems approach here, which is not always the easiest thing, but we believe in it, and we think we can get many good results in the end as well.
Thank you very much, and let's hope that we won't make Palme disappointed 40 years later than he said these really important words. So thank you, State Secretary Callenberg. We will now turn to FAO, and we will first screen a short movie, a FAO movie, and thereafter we will go straight to the intervention of Maximo Torero, the Chief Economist of FAO, which is, as I mentioned, recorded. So first the movie and then the intervention.
Somos las raíces que nutren.
每一位粮食英雄都发挥着重要作用。
Nous devons nourrir le monde.
È giunto il momento di risollevarsi.
Together, we can make a difference.
To lives and communities everywhere.
Нам нужна устойчивая продовольственная система.
لأن مصيرنا واحد.
Dear colleagues, it's a real pleasure to be here today in this very important day for us, the World Food Day. And I'm going to do a presentation to show the situation where we are and what we need to do and what changes are needed. Let me share my screen with you. So, growth, nourish, and sustain together is a very important topic for us. It's something that we want to achieve. It's our SDG 2. Is that what we need to create a change? But what we are being facing today is a set of changes in different drivers. We were normally aware of the population growth and how the human pressure was going to change the demands for different types of food. We were also very aware of climate change and the importance of climate change and what are the changes that we need to do to be able to cope with that, although up to now we have not been very successful. And we were also aware of the ecosystem decline and how we need to create a transformation to minimize that problem. And that was the reason why there was the launch of the Food System Summit by the Secretary General. But today we know one more thing, is that agriculture and the food system will face surprises. And COVID-19 has shown that those surprises will appear and will come. And that's something that we need to be aware. And that changes very importantly the way we'll operate in the food system. And I hope the World Food Day is a benchmark for us to start changing and to start creating the transformation that we need for the agri-food system. Why is this so important? Because we have not so good key facts. First, unhealthy diets account for nearly 1 in 5 deaths worldwide. 1.9 billion people are overweight or obese. The cost of malnutrition in all its forms global economy is estimated to be 3.5 trillion per year. More than 3 billion people cannot afford healthy diets. And over 2 billion people cannot access to safe and nutritious food. This is not good news. 135 million people experience acute food insecurity across 55 countries and territories, according to our global food crisis report. And only 9 plants account for 66% of total crop production out of a total of 30,000 edible plants. We are not using our biodiversity. And 14% of our produced food is lost each year before reaching the wholesale market. So this is losses, this is not even waste. Again, how it is possible that we're losing 14%, around $400 billion of food when we are facing a situation of significant levels of undernourishment? 690 million people undernourished today before COVID-19. That's not feasible. And 3 billion people don't have access to healthy diets. And also nearly a quarter of all green gas emissions are due to the food and agricultural sector. So these key facts tell us, even before COVID-19, that we were far from achieving the SDG 2, and we were not in the proper track to be able to achieve it, and we need to create a transformation. But then, of course, COVID-19 came and has struck at a time when hunger keeps rising. So according to our new latest estimates of FAO, 83 to 132 million people may go hungry in 2020, 132 up to 132 million people as a result of economic recession triggered by the pandemic. So this is what it means. It means in poverty, going back 10 years. Basically, we will be increasing poverty, extreme poverty, in 115 million, according to the latest World Bank estimates. That's losing a decade of reduction of extreme poverty. And undernourishment, as we mentioned, will increase to 132 million people moving into undernourishment. And also, if we look at unemployment and the problem of jobs, which is what are we concerned because of the recession, the decrease in GDP growth at the global level and all the countries of the world will affect our labor force. And COVID-19 has affected our labor force. Just to have an idea, in agriculture, we have 1.2 billion jobs, 1.2 billion jobs, which means 3.2 billion livelihoods. And the COVID-19 is affecting 451 million jobs in agriculture. But not only that, if we look at the decomposition across the food system, and that is in the pie chart in your right-hand side, what we see is that in what is primary production, only 21% of the jobs are at risk. But where the major problem is in food processing, in food services, and in distribution. 60% of those jobs are at risk, 60%. And what is the problem is that the people behind those jobs are mostly females. If you go to any packaging facility, you will see that most of this is done by females. So not only we're going to lose a significant percentage of the jobs, 35% of the jobs are at risk, but we are also having a problem because it is increasing the inequalities in gender. And in general, it is increasing all inequalities. What we know is that income inequality is rising in nearly half of the countries of the world, including in several low-income countries and some middle-income countries. So we have 3 SDGs, SDG 1, SDG 2, and SDG 10. Poverty, undernourishment, and inequality. We are clearly getting a huge impact in poverty 10 years back. Huge impact in undernourishment, more than 10 years back. But inequality, which is the one that needs to change structurally to be able to achieve SDG 1 and SDG 2, is also and will also exacerbate and increase more. So the situation is very critical and is, I think, the time to create a change. So in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, it is time to build back better. It is time to create the transformation that we need. People say we don't need a transformation because our agricultural production has shown resilience. But is that true? Yes. Agriculture has shown resilience, and we still have food in the supermarkets. We still have food in the markets, in the wholesale. Small farmers are producing, and they are supplying the food. They are heroes. They are really working hard to supply the food. But the challenge is that not everybody is getting that food. A significant amount of our population is not getting that food. 690 million people plus 132 because of COVID-19 are chronically hunger. And 3 billion people cannot eat healthy diets. So something is not working. And that is what we need to change. That's when we refer to transformation, to the transformation of the agri-food system so that everybody can have access to healthy diets, but in a sustainable way, meaning that we control for the situation of our environment, we reduce emissions, and we take care of our natural resources. That's the core. We need to create resilient food systems to transform the quality of diets, particularly for vulnerable communities. We need to give access to those 3 billion people to food. We need to achieve zero hunger and zero undernourishment. And we know today, after our last studies, that to reduce only undernourishment, it could imply $14 billion a year until 2030 of catalytic investment. Of course, countries will need to keep doing the same and invest at same levels, but this catalytic investment is assigned properly to interventions that have a huge return, could help us to move 500 million people out of undernourishment. So it is possible. We can do the transformation, but we need to work hard and we need to start now. We cannot keep waiting to do that. So governments need to practice global solidarity. For example, in response to COVID-19 pandemic, several grain-producing countries refrained from adopting export restrictions, and that's the way to go. The countries that moved into export restrictions, they understood and they went back, and we need to keep that. We need to keep trade flowing, because that will assign resources in an efficient way. Governments need to address the needs of the most vulnerable, targeting the poorest. COVID-19 is creating significant new hotspots of food insecurity. A lot of new hungry people, a lot of people in acute food insecurity, which is a crisis definition. We need to react. We need to target those. It doesn't make sense that we're doing trillions of dollars of recovery plans and we have so much people hungry in the world. We need to resolve and we need to focus our investments to target those new hotspots of food insecurity. And governments need to protect food and agriculture as an essential service. It is true, we need to keep the value chains alive, but we are still in COVID-19. COVID-19 has not been resolved. So we have a huge risk. And the only way we can cope with that risk is keeping the health standards high and allowing our value chains to keep operating by making them essential services. Those are the elements that we need to bring together, and we need to bring the private business to invest in decent employment and to invest in areas where we need. We need to create the enable environment for them to come to areas where we have smallholders. It's not only economic growth, it's also inclusive economic growth. And that's the change. And to make it inclusive, it could be that we'll go a little bit slower, but will be more sustainable and will accelerate more later. So let's not take the shortcut. Let's do it properly. Let's combine big data, innovation, technology, but also the complements, which are central of our strategy. Complements brings governance, human capital, capacities, and regulation. We need to have those in place. No matter they will slow the other three accelerators, data, technology, and innovation, but it will allow us to make it sustainable over time. And private sector can play a crucial role working with civil society organizations and with universities to allow us to achieve this enormous goal. But we need to start now, we need to start to operate now to create the change and the transformation that we need. Because we need our population to be able to make the correct diet choice. We need these people to access healthy diets, but we also need their behavioral change. And we can make them have the behavioral change, but food needs to be available at affordable prices. It's true that today we have enough food for the world, but we're talking of calories. We're talking of enough cereals for the world. We're not talking of enough healthy diets for the world. And healthy diets is a concept that brings not only nutrition, also brings diet diversity, which contextualizes also to the reality of each of the countries. And that's where we need to create the change, and that's where we need to create what we want to do today of this transformation. We can all become food heroes, but we need to react, we need to reduce food losses, we need to reduce food waste, we need to transform the way we operate, we need to increase international solidarity, because COVID-19 has shown us that if one is still sick, we are all sick. So if we don't create a change across the board, we are not going to achieve our SDG goals, and we are not going to achieve what we want. So thank you so much for this kind of invitation, and I am sorry I cannot be with you today, but I hope we can create a big difference and a big change today for the future, so that we can start making the difference. I wish you the best for today, and I really hope we can move forward in this food system, agri-food system transformation. Thank you very much.
Yes, it's a bit weird to say thank you to someone in the meeting, but anyway, I think we should extend our thank you to FAO and Mr. Torero for sending us this important video message. And I think that many of the things that Mr. Torero addressed in his note will also be brought up, but maybe more concretely in examples by the speakers that are coming now. And we have invited a number of people from civil society, private sector and public sector to give us short presentations. And if there is time at the end of each presentation, there might be time for questions. But I think looking at the presentations that we've received, I think we will probably take all the questions at the end at the panel. So we will start. I think also the link to the food heroes that was mentioned is a good link to a short movie that we will see now coming from the agroforestry. And just after the video screening, we will hear from Anna Tibblin, who is the Secretary General of the Agroforestry and We Effect.
COVID-19 imetuadhiri pakubwa kabisa.
I've heard it from the radios and I also watched it on TV.
Transport has become difficult. If I don't bring food at exactly 1 p.m., it means I'm going to stay without food the whole night.
I can't harvest my honey due to restricted movement and curfew, since harvesting is done at night.
It has also led to decrease in sale of farm produce that I produce, hence reducing the level of my income.
And due to this low income, we have our peace at home is very low because we are arguing who is to provide for the family.
We don't have market where to sell our eggs.
Ikibazo cy'imirire nacyo kiraduhangayikishije kuko amasoko asa nkaho ibiciro byagiye hejuru.
As a single mother, there is increased workload in terms of handling the children and preventing them from going outside and mingling with others.
It has also made me discover that I can make use of the small land around me. For example, This is my nursery bed, and those are my seed beds.
One of the control measures of controlling COVID-19 is being washing hands regularly.
Yes, so I would now like to introduce Anna Tibblin, who's the Secretary General of both the Agroforestry and We Effect. Please, Anna, join the stage.
Thank you very much, Kajsa, and hi everyone, and thank you for the opportunity of participating today in this panel and being able to speak and maybe just commenting that movie or film. I've seen it now several times, and every single time it impacts me just the same. And I think maybe that is the most important thing that we need to remember as we continue to work together and forward. And that is that behind the numbers, these horrendous numbers that we are seeing, there are people who are pretty much the same wherever they happen to live in the world, people who want their children to have decent lives. And when we look at the effects of the corona crisis, we clearly see that poverty and hunger is increasing. We see how decades of positive development are being erased, and it's only in a couple of months. When farm workers and other day laborers are not allowed to leave their homes, they can't work. And when they can't work, they can't eat, just as we saw in this film. And as you know, globally, approximately 60% of all employment is in the informal sector. David Beasley, the head of the World Food Programme, and as we all know, the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize this year, he speaks of a famine of, quote, biblical proportions. And I think we can perhaps change the picture there. I'll say beep and ask you to do that. I think it's Ian who's behind the controls. And we know that many more people risk dying from the economic crisis than from the virus itself. Now, according to the worst case scenario, that's 500 million people who will be pushed into poverty. And I think what's important to remember here is that these are people who already before the crisis lived on the margin, but are now being pushed over the edge. 130 million people risk acute hunger, and that's only this year. And that's double as many as before the pandemic. We see among our partner organizations in both VI Agroforestry and in VFX that women and girls are particularly vulnerable. We know that many countries have introduced emergency laws to crack down on opposition and limit movement, using the pandemic as an excuse to limit the freedoms of its citizens. That means that women are affected even harder, not only because they're the last to eat, but also because they're locked in with their perpetrators. We can go ahead and change the picture, please. People that were living on the margins 6 months ago are now hungry. Many of them are not living in conflict countries or in direct humanitarian contexts. So the hunger pandemic, it's not only a humanitarian crisis, it's a development crisis in several dimensions. In Eastern Africa, as in the movie, we see that farmers are able to produce, but have difficulties in reaching markets. They can't afford inputs, whilst the consumers just don't have the money. I'll give you an example from VI Agroforestry in Mount Elgin, because schools are closed and children remain at home, it also means that those children are not receiving school meals. It also means that there's less milk for these dairy producers to actually try to sell in the market. So the close down and the lockdowns have effects in so many different ways. And as I mentioned, of course, you know that the World Food Programme received the Nobel Peace Prize, and it's well deserved, it's very welcome. And I think we have momentum because the issue of food is on the agenda. But in that, it's also important that we together step up our game, that we join forces and show that also other UN organizations, of course, like the FAO, not the least, but also IFAD and the UNDP, and the farmers' organizations themselves are absolutely key if we're going to succeed. Help is needed here and now, but the answer lies in long-term planning and investments in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. It's about sustainable agricultural policy, it's about good governments, and it's about investments, but also maybe new thinking about what we could have called old solutions. We talk a lot of development lingo. We talk localization, we talk double nexus, triple nexus, and different approaches. Maybe it's also time to skip the terminology and remember that we're talking about people and people's right to own their own development. And the picture that you see now, I'm just sharing it that this is a partner meeting in the Balkans. It's the first time there's a partner meeting across the region, and yes, everybody is on their phones. This was possible to do a year ago, but we never got that far. Now we are. We see more participatory development methods. We see that it is possible. What's required here is one computer, one internet connection, and one telephone with a decent camera. And we are seeing more participatory approaches to development. Everyone in this panel and digital room, if we should call it that, knows that small-scale farmers are absolutely key to fighting hunger and poverty. And we also know that a clear majority of the world's poor live in rural areas and depend on agriculture to survive. We know that investments in agriculture in poor countries are twice as effective in combating poverty and hunger, not only because the World Bank says so, but because we see it in our everyday work. We see those results because we're there together with the people that we met in the film earlier. And we also see the results of less foreign investments that, according to the last estimates, are down by 40% following the pandemic. A sharp decrease in remittances, down 20%. And we also know that aid budgets are shrinking in many countries. Now, in the government proposal for this year's budget, we're allocating 1% of GNI to development cooperation. This is important, and it's something I think we need to be continuously proud of. But as we continue to defend this budget, it's also very important to discuss what we use it for. Today, very little is designated to sustainable food production. And as we affect, and I think all of us here today, we want this proportion to increase.
Anna, you have 2 minutes left.
Okay, thank you. Now, We Affect is the development organization of the Swedish Cooperative movement, and our commitment, of course, is to do our job, but also to strengthen our work together with the rest of the cooperative movement in Sweden and in globally. And there are different ways of doing that. Last week, we held a seminar together with the Farmers Federation of Sweden and the Consumer Federation in Stockholm, presenting results of an opinion poll that Swedes are actually prepared to pay more for food produced by smallholder farmers if you know that the money reaches the farmers. I think there's an enormous opportunity in that. You can change the picture. As We Affect, we'd like to challenge everyone here today. What is it we can do to scale up further? What can we do to be even more efficient? We know that the crisis is real. We know poverty is increasing and that we are losing development results, but we also have momentum to shift. We need to step out of our silos, and it's not enough to talk about solidarity. We also need to turn that into action. As we work, let's remind ourselves that we have the knowledge, we have the resources, and we know what works. In these pictures, you'll see that you can continue to flip the pictures. You'll see it looks pretty much the same over the years. It's the same focus. It's just the approaches that change as we learn. So let's stick to our guns and focus on what we know works. finally, and I promise I'm winding up, Kajsa, some lessons that we have learned as we affect. Of course, a couple of months ago, few Swedes had thought really about what global vulnerability means. I think that's clearer than ever that we are connected. It's not only about health, it's about the economy. We can't close borders and close our eyes. It's not going to go away. Food systems are interconnected as well. The future is global. There will be more crises, and we have to stand stronger next time. We have to focus on decreasing vulnerability. And finally, we are celebrating a 75-year birthday party. And when you think about it, that's usually the kind of party when you bring together different generations, maybe relatives who don't always meet, maybe don't even like each other, but they come together to put aside their differences and to celebrate and to focus. Let's keep that picture with us. Let's continue to work together because it's our responsibility and because we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Anna. I think also in the middle of your presentation, you actually made a link to the next presenter. We have Katarina Eriksson from Tetra Laval, who will talk about school meals and dairy production. So please, Katarina, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I represent Laval Food for Development, and we provide technical assistance to our partners in the field of school feeding and also smallholder milk production. I'm very happy to be here today to talk to you about school feeding more than just providing a meal on this celebration of the World Food Day and the 75th anniversary of FAO. So next slide, please. So let me start by giving a global overview of the school feeding. World Food Programme, which we have heard mentioned already, this year's winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. In 2013, they estimated that 368 million children in 169 countries receive food in school. That's a lot of children, but unfortunately, those who need it the most do not get this opportunity. Globally, 1 in 3 children are not growing well due to malnutrition, and half of the world's children suffer from hidden hunger. That means that they eat, but they don't eat well, and they don't get the nutrition that they need. Overweight and obesity is a growing problem. We saw some numbers earlier here, and it's still increasing in many countries. And since the 1970s, it has increased 10 to 12 times among children, which is a lot. So school feeding is a good investment for a country. And there are many studies that have been trying to estimate how good. And it's for every dollar spent, at least for every dollar spent, at least 3 to 10 is gained in economic returns. And actually, a recent study is suggesting even as much as $20. Next, please. Milk is the core business of our group. De Laval is a supplier to dairy farms all over the world, and Tetra Pak is a supplier of processing and packaging systems to the dairy and food industry. So then let me say a few words about school milk. The International Dairy Federation published a study earlier this year that concludes that at least 160 million children in 62 countries receive milk in school. 200 milliliter, a portion of 200 milliliter is the most common. It's usually plain milk, either whole milk or semi-skimmed milk. It's most often provided for free or at least at a subsidized cost in the majority of these programs. Also, most implementers indicate that the main objective is to improve child health and nutrition. Most of the programs use carton packages, obviously some of ours as well, and 3 out of 4 programs use UHT or long life products. So this is a market for Tetra Pak and our customers, and we estimate that last year 68 million children in 56 countries actually received milk or another nutritious drink in a Tetra Pak carton. But as I mentioned earlier, we also provide technical assistance. We're just not a supply. We also provide many of these programs. So school feeding is a lot more than just a meal. For many children around the world, the school meal is the only nutritious meal they get during the day. And I will come soon to what that has meant when the COVID pandemic has closed many of the schools. School feeding also builds healthy eating habits. What you eat as a child really affects a lot what you eat as a grown-up and what you give your own children. And also many programs are combining school feeding with nutrition education so that children can be taught how to eat well, where the food comes from, how to live a healthy life, exercise, look after your personal hygiene, and so on. School feeding also in many cases attracts children to school, and this is especially important for girls. It increases both enrollment and attendance, and we've also seen in many programs that it stops children from going home early from school because they're hungry. And school feeding is also a way to develop the agriculture sector and the local economy because it creates demand for local quality foods. And it helps develop a formal market for smallholder farmers. Next, please. We are all living in the middle of a pandemic and we are all affected. This map shows the situation for school closures in the end of April. And as you can see, most of the schools in the world were closed, and it meant that 1.5 billion children were out of school. And they were not only out of school, many of them were also deprived of the food that they usually get in school. Next, please. The loss of school food has been and is still a very heavy burden for vulnerable children and their families. Children do not get the nutrition they need, and families have this extra burden of feeding the child at home during the day. But in many cases, countries have made a very big effort to distribute food to children that are out of school, and we have seen different varieties of this. We have seen take-home rations being handed out in schools or through special distribution centers. We have seen home deliveries of food packs, and we have seen vouchers being handed out so that families can buy food to compensate for the lost school food. And I'm giving you a few examples here. One is from Russia, where food packages have been delivered to vulnerable families. This is from Ulyanovsk, but we've seen this in many other regions. In China, to avoid the spread of the virus, they have introduced lockers so that the parents can come to school. They have a code to a locker, and they can, without meeting anybody, fetch school milk for their child. And in El Salvador, the last picture here, we see school food and milk being handed out to families through this special distribution center. And in all of these cases, of course, food safety is very, very important. Now when you're introducing new ways of distributing school food. So long life products such as UHT milk, dry foods have been used to guarantee food safety. And also we've seen how the UN family have tried to help governments with ideas and advice. And this is a publication that World Food Programme, FAO and UNICEF have published together, and it gives guidance on how to support and transform or adapt school feeding, of course now short term, to help safeguard school children's food security and nutrition during this pandemic. And it includes a lot of protocols, information about nutrition, which types of food that work well in these types of out of school distributions, and food safety, and a lot of examples to inspire and give examples to governments and implementers on how they can continue to provide food for children that are out of school. Next, please. So to conclude, so let me connect to this year's theme for World Food Day that I think very well summarizes what school feeding does and what it's all about: grow, nourish, sustain together. So school feeding helps the young generation grow up educated and to grow up healthy. And school feeding nourishes children, of course, provided that they get something nutritious in school, which in most cases they do. And school feeding creates a sustainable market for local foods. This is, as I mentioned, a very, very good way of encouraging and creating demand for quality products and involving smallholder farmers from the informal sector into the formal sector. And finally, working together in a multi-stakeholder school feeding partnership. This is really a key for long-term sustainability. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Katarina. And I think we will go straight to one of the producers that we have with us here in the seminar. I present Elisabeth Hedén, who is the chair or the president of the Federation of Young Swedish Farmers. So please, Elisabeth.
Yes, hello. First of all, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. And you can take the next slide. So this is my agenda for today. First, I will start to shortly introduce myself and the Federation of Young Swedish Farmers. Thereafter, I will talk about the journey the Swedish agriculture have done and opportunities and challenges. And hopefully we have some time for questions in the end. Next. So my name is Elisabeth Hedén. I am 25 years old and I grew up on a farm in the middle of Sweden. I have studied agronomist with business economy at the Swedish University of Agricultural Science. In March this year, I was elected for president of the Federation of Swedish Young Farmers. We have 16,000 members all over Sweden in the age between 0 till 36 years. Next. So today I will talk about the journey we have made in Sweden over the past 200 years. 200 years ago, Sweden was a very poor country with a starving population. A lot of people choose to emigrate to America. Today, Sweden is a country with a lot of food production and even with opportunities for exports. What made this possible? The reason that we have succeeded has been several. Next. So this is some of the big things that have happened. First, as early as the 18th century, the state wanted to see a richer Sweden, and one way was to make the agriculture more efficient. So there was a map change. There was exchange between farmers' land, so they become larger and more coherent shifts. The farmers got bigger but fewer fields. In this time, we also have a technical development in form of tool development. The iron plow was coming to Sweden. The years between 1791 and 1850, Hushållningssällskapet were formed in every part of the country, and that is an organization. Their task was and still is to work with the development of agriculture, forestry and fishing. 1850, the next major change in the structure of agriculture took place when the oil became cheap and made it possible with mechanization, long distance transports and fertilizer use. As early as the middle of the 19th century, synthetic mineral fertilizer were available, but they were used on a small scale and mainly for newly mined land that lacked minerals. The years 1867 till 1869, there was a big famine in Sweden. A little more than half of the population emigrated to America. It was a big lack of food, but here too an evolutionary event took place. The cultivation of nitrogen fixing ligaments started, and the years between between the 19th century and the 20th century, we're more than doubling the arable land. 1930, the fossil energy in the form of oil began to use on a large scale, that the production of fertilizer began to earn. Thanks to cheap oil, air nitrogen could be fixed synthetical, and nitrogen fertilizer could be produced. So this is some of the biggest change historically. Next, please. So what did this result in? In 1850, we could produce 700 kilos of grain per hectare. It took 150 working hours to produce, and about 90% work in the agriculture. Today, we can produce 7,000 kilos of grain per hectare, and it takes about 45 working hours to produce, and less than 5% work with agriculture. And you can see also the numbers with dairy cows, that 200 years ago, a cow milked an average of 800 kilo a year, and today it's 9,000 kilo a year. Unfortunately, we are not self-sufficient in milk. So what can make this possible? It is strategical transformations, political actions, knowledge and education, and research and development. Next. And of course, it's breeding, feed optimization, good conditions, proper use of medication, mineral fertilizer, and technology development. And what are the challenges ahead? It is hard to get young people to become farmers because it's low income and very expensive to start. But we really need to do something about this because the average farmer in Sweden today are 58 years old. But the farms get bigger and bigger and fewer, and the land prices get more expensive, which make it very hard to come into the market. We have a lack of knowledge for the consumers, and of course, few people work with farms, so the knowledge about farming is going down. If we had more knowledge, the consumers could buy more sustainable food. We had big problems with food waste. We are building on arable land. It's 600 hectares a year in Sweden that we never can take back again. Weather has always been a challenge for farmers, but in the future, it's possible that the climate is even more unpredictable. And we have the soil compactions. And of course, one of the biggest challenges for farming all over the world are the low profitability. Next. But we have some opportunities too. We can increase the production and make it more sustainable by technology, research and development. We can export food, but not only the food, we can also export the knowledge, let other countries implement the transformation we have made without having to go through the unsustainable steps. We have been doing this 200 years. And we can educate consumers so they can choose more sustainable food and throw less food. And I think this journey is fully possible for all countries around the world to do, which makes it feel very hopeful. But it's important to be humble and understand that we all have different conditions and challenges. It's also important that countries with large supplies do not see themselves as the job is done. It is always possible to work for improvement. Next. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Very interesting indeed. I couldn't help comparison the figures that you mentioned from 1850. Those are usually the more or less the kilos that the farmers in Southern Africa tell us about, like how much grain they can grow on 1 hectare. It's about a bit less than a ton, and that's the figure you mentioned for 1850s in Sweden. So it's indeed telling that much more food could be produced very close to the people who are most in need. Thank you very much. I think we will take the questions in the end. I see some similarities here. I mean, it is really about putting the agriculture question, the production of food and so on the agenda, whether it is about like understanding the conditions far away, so to say, or the conditions for production of food here in Sweden. So thank you very much. And now we will have an example from Zambia and how communication and information technology can help in production systems and marketization. So please, Sole Neva from the Swedish Embassy in Zambia will now make a presentation about the Dairy Association in Zambia. Yes, I don't hear anyone. Is there maybe a microphone issue?
Hello, can you get me?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm saying I'm happy to be able to present, to be given this opportunity to be able to present the project from Zambia, which was supported by SIDA. And the project is entitled Digital Information Management System and implemented by DAZ, which is Dairy Association of Zambia. Next. Next, please. Next slide.
Ian, can you put the next slide?
Yeah, the Dairy Association of Zambia, as you can see, is a member-based organization which has about 6,000 plus dairy farmers, and they are organized in the business hubs, which are called milk collection centers. And in Zambia, they are basically near the line of rail, where there is basic infrastructure. And SIDA funded this project for a period of 2 years, and it is specifically looked at 32 milk collection centers, which are called MCCs. Next slide. Actually, we implemented the project called Digital Information Management Systems, which was trying to, commercialize the dairy value chain. And there are a number of activities which were undertaken to actualize this project, such as baseline surveys to get information, especially on the characteristics of the farmers, the issues of network connectivity, and also how many farmers had phones, and just to set the baseline. And then also now we moved on to profile the farmers into the system itself, the digital technological system, which was housed at each and every milk collection centers. We can go on. And then the role of Dairy Association of Zambia, in this project was basically data management and facilitate linkages, and also member mobilizations and lobbying the government for better policies, and also to ensure that the dairy concerns of the dairy farmers are also taken into consideration. You can see on the picture here, these are the basic stakeholders, the primary stakeholders in the value chain. They are the processors, the milk processors, the farmer who is the input, the milk producers, and the consumers at the end of the day. And I should mention also that the Dairy Association tries to promote good governance among its members, so that they are well organized, and they do elections every year, and they are able to choose their leaders at the lowest level in their communities. And these now are brought together at the central place called the Milk Collection Center, and they are at the apex. They are supported by the Dairy Association of Zambia. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, there are many challenges in the dairy sector, and you can see they have highlighted a whole range of them. But basically, they are associated with production. They are also associated with the head management, and most of these were basically enhanced, especially during the outbreak of COVID. Where you find the production and productivity of milk really went down because of a lot of things, restricted movement, the inputs were restricted to reach the farmers, those kind of things, and even people were not able to attend to their herds as they used to do before. Even extension services were a problem, but basically these are the many problems which you find in the dairy sector, especially in Zambia. Yeah, you can go to the next. And because of these problems, the embassy, through its own planning, we came up with this project, which I had earlier on talked about, which is called the Digital Information Management System. And if you look at it in this picture, you'll find that the MCC, this is where the business hub is. This is where the farmers are organized into, and this is connected to the input supplier, who supplies like feed, you know, to the MCCs, and then the MCC, the milk collection center is connected to the farmer, and the farmer is connected to the farmer through the device, the phone, and the farmer through the phone receives all the services which I've listed on the left hand side. And also the MCC is also connected to the processor who receives the milk from the milk collection center. So you find that the farmers will take the milk to the milk collection center, and this is a central hub which is connected to all the services that are required in the value chain. Next slide. Next slide. And then the results, you know, which have been, you know, attained from this project. You'll find that the record keeping was quite bad actually before this project. So basically you find that the information was now readily captured, and also the farmers could receive messages on their phones, and also they could have access to inputs, you know, using the phones. Here, access to inputs is that, you see, because of good information, even the people who would be able to give the inputs on credit to the farmers easily, because they know that this farmer produces so much volume of milk, and they will be able to deduct the payments through the transaction systems of the device, where the farmers are able to pay slow and pay every delivery of the milk through without just going there to pay cash. And also, these farmers could receive information on, for instance, for their meetings. They could also receive information on the volumes they have, you know, put there, and also extension messages were also received through the system. Next slide. Next slide, please. And then also I talked about the improvement in the transaction systems with the parties involved, the processors, the input suppliers, and also the farmers. You know, they are able to know how much money and how much money they are expecting, how much milk they have submitted. So this transaction process was now transparent and was easy to follow by all the parties involved in the transactions. And as I said, there was also easy access to credit because of the transparency in the information, and also there were savings groups which were, you know, formed, and these savings groups were introduced to the system such that they would provide, for instance, feed or medicine to the farmers on credit, and would be able to get their monies on time. Also, there was improved, as I said, record keeping, and we saw also the introduction of new players in the market, in the milk market, and these were like women and youth, which are basically less participants previously in the dairy subsector, and also the youth. Although, as earlier mentioned by my other colleague, it's difficult to attract the youth in the agriculture sector, but this one, at least they could provide some services like transportation, and also would provide inputs to the farmers. And also there was also this project recorded enhanced human development through trainings, and some people could see the computers for the first time and how to use these gadgets in the milk value chain. Next slide. Next slide, please. Now, during the COVID period, actually, as I earlier mentioned, that it was difficult, and the whole economic setup of the farmers were disrupted. So you find that the supply of milk to the MCCs was limited. This digital project became very, very handy in this period, because now the extension messages and other technical messages from the healthy, for instance, healthy Ministry of Health, and also from the membership itself, were communicated through the digital project, and it became very handy in this period, such that even sensitization meetings, sensitization messages, and all relevant information were transmitted in this. Also, we saw the increase in the youth participation in the business, because previously you find that farmers would in the morning, most of the farmers would take the milk direct to the milk collection centers. But now the youth who were empowered with motorbikes, and which they got on loan, were able now to be able to collect from the farmers, and so the farmers couldn't travel those distances. It was just the youth. So the youth in that period could get additional income from the transportation services they were providing to the dairy farmers. And also we saw that
to wrap up, because you're over time already, so please try to wrap up.
I think
to the end
this
of the
is the last. This is the last one, actually. And then there was also the governance trainings which were done online. I think if there's another one, you can just go to the next slide. I think this is the last one. Yeah. I just wanted to emphasize the importance in the COVID period that this project really, worked wonders. Yeah, and I mean, it helped everybody, especially who were involved in the dairy value chain, and together they managed to score some goals.
Yes, thank you very much. Really interesting indeed to get some a more in-depth example of this. I think the milk and the school milk is like the red thread, and I made a quick search about if Olof Palme, where we began, actually said something about school milk, and he did. In a public debate in the Swedish Parliament in 1972, he underlined the importance of the public sector to continue to support all school children in Sweden with free school milk. So I think still we haven't disappointed him, at least in this seminar. So please, I would like to welcome the last speaker before we go into the panel, where we have already received some questions. But please, if you have a question to any of the speakers, please provide them in the chat, and we will bring them up in the joint panel discussion shortly. So I would like to introduce Gustav Lindskog, who works at SIDA, yeah, please, Gustav, go ahead.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for the opportunity, and also a big thank to the previous speakers and the very interesting presentation so far. I would like to issue a warning that this part of the seminar could be a bit depressing, but hopefully we can conclude afterwards in a more optimistic way. Next slide, please. Because the world is currently facing an acute hunger crisis, and after decades of progress and reduced hunger, things have now turned in the wrong direction. And as a result of different things, conflicts, climate change, and economic instability, world hunger has now increased over the past 5 years, and the threat of famine is looming yet again, only 3 years after the famine alarms that we received in 2017. And already before the pandemic, we faced a number of challenges to the vision of a world without hunger, food insecurity, and malnutrition. The world population has grown steadily, so we now need to feed more people. Conflict and instability have increased in many parts of the world, putting pressure on food and agriculture. And of course, climate change and environmental degradation are affecting food production and natural resources in unprecedented ways. So 5 years into the 2030 agenda, it is now time to question whether our current efforts will be enough, as we are currently off track to achieve the SDG targets for hunger and malnutrition. Next slide, please. 2020 was already a challenging year in terms of hunger, as you know, and 2021 is likely going to be even more difficult because even before the COVID-19 pandemic, almost 690 million people went hungry worldwide, of whom 135 million people experienced crises or worse level of acute food insecurity. And of these, about 74 million people are living in conflict-affected areas in countries such as Yemen, South Sudan, northeastern Nigeria, Sahel and Somalia. And conflict remains the main driver of food crisis and acute hunger worldwide. Next slide, please. Food is also closely connected to displacement, as people leave their homes, often because of lack of food, but also because displaced people are also often facing food insecurity and malnutrition. And of the estimated 79 million people displaced globally, more than half of them are living in countries with already critical levels of acute food insecurity. And aid agencies are already being forced to reduce food assistance in camps and sites in many parts of the world due to limited funding. Next, please. So the combined effects of conflict, economic pressures, climate-related shocks and crop pests, such as recently the devastating desert locust outbreak in Eastern Africa and Yemen, have all further worsened the food insecurity and vulnerability to shocks globally. And now, as you all know, we need to face a pandemic, which risks to push an additional 130 million people into acute hunger by the end of this year, threatening to almost double the number of acutely hungry people to about 270 million people. And rising levels of food insecurity have already been recorded in many countries, including countries such as Afghanistan, Central African Republic, Ethiopia and Somalia. And the issue is that people in these countries were already very vulnerable to shocks and have hence very limited or basically no capacity at all to cope with neither the health aspects of the pandemic, but also the socioeconomic aspects of the pandemic. Next, please. No, we can yes, or maybe, yeah, next, perfect. So what should we do? Of course, we need to act, and we need to act now to avoid losing development gains and having millions of people falling into severe food insecurity. But we also need to act collectively and rethink old ways of cooperation, because even though the situation is acute, I totally agree with what Anna Tibblin stated earlier, that the current hunger crisis is not solely a humanitarian issue. And even though I'm coming from the humanitarian side, I would really like to underscore this, that humanitarian efforts cannot be the solution to today's hunger crisis. Instead, when 10 years remain to achieve the SDG targets, it is now time to intensify the work to address the root causes of the growing hunger, which, among other things, include things that we have been discussing here today: improvement of the current food systems into systems that are able to meet today's challenges by addressing issues of sustainability, including loss and degradation of natural resources and biodiversity. And finally, I would really like to emphasize the need for a resilient food systems, because households that depend on farming and pastoralism for their livelihoods are already among the worst affected by conflict, climate change and natural disasters worldwide, putting the livelihoods, food security and nutrition at constant risk. And all of those aspects threaten to reverse development gains and in the end our possibilities to reach the SDGs. So on this happy note, I will leave to the panel. Hopefully we will have an interesting panel discussion, and then I will get back with some concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gustav, and indeed a bit depressing, but I think we also had several contributions talking about the solutions, and you did too. But the situation is indeed a bit depressing. We have received a number of questions from the audience, so I will take some of them and let's see how far we get. And one of the questions regards what Anna talked about, but I think it relates also to, for example, Elizabeth. If we can say that Swedish consumers are willing to pay more for food. So what is needed to make this happen? Like, how do we approach this? If we know this, then what?
Do you want to start, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I can start. First of all, I think we need to educate the consumers, as I said before, because you don't know, you're not willing to pay more if you don't know what you get when you're paying for it. And then I think we also need to be sure that the money comes to the farmers and don't disappear some other steps in the chain, because that's a big problem today. In Sweden, at least, the farmers only get 10% of what the consumer pay in the food store. So that's something we need to work with, even if the consumers could pay more.
Thank you. And Anna?
No, I think it's let's promote what we know is there. We know that fair trade is doing a great job. Let's increase. As consumers, we can put demands on our supermarkets. We, for example, have Coop as one of our owners, as we affect them via agroforestry. We want them to increase the sustainability of their produce and so on. More fair trade products, looking at the sustainability of all food products in general. So it's consumer power, but it's also political decisions. Make it easy, as easy as possible, to do the right thing. And I think that's in the political side.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. We also got a question that was directed to Sole, but I think it is also relevant for Katarina, since you both work in the same sector. So the question is that you mentioned that women and youth and input suppliers were new entrants into the milk value chain. And do you know the reasons behind why these groups entered? And what was it that enabled them to join what they were previously not able? So maybe, Sole, if you want to start, and then maybe Katarina, you will give us some insights too.
Yeah, no, thanks very much for the question. Actually, first I would say that the women were first trained, exposed to training and exposed to training which identified some of the business opportunities that existed in the milk value chain. And as I said, the milk value, the project itself was supporting the implementation of the digital information system, where the farmers now were trying to use the system and the milk collection points as the hubs for the business. So within those hubs, there came out a few of opportunities which the beneficiaries, which the entrepreneurs saw that they can participate. For instance, the women were organized in these groupings, the savings and credit groups, and some of them identified the opportunity within there that of supplying feed. So they would buy feed, they would save the money and then buy feed from the near local hammer mills, for instance, and the milling plants near, and then use that to sell to the farmers on credit, and then the farmers would pay later on. The youth also were involved in provision of transportation services, which I mentioned, and also the making of silage, which is the feed for the animals. So they would provide that, and the farmers would pay slowly using the system. Previously, they were not trained. They were not really organized in those business hubs, where the payments were visible and the records were visible. So there was that a level of confidence which was built because of the project, so such that they were even able to provide services on credit. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. And Katarina.
Thank you. Yeah, as I mentioned in the beginning, we also work with the value chain projects helping smallholders, which we do through connecting them to our dairy processing customers. And I think that Sole, you mentioned the key word here. They saw business opportunities. And Elizabeth, you mentioned the struggle for many farmers with profitability. And I think these are the two key things. Women or youth or anybody, if you want to help attract people into agriculture, there has to be a business opportunity and there has to be profitability. So this is what we focus on in our, what we call dairy hub projects, which are very similar, I think, to, or there are many similarities with what Sole told us about the project in Zambia. And I hope Tetra Pak's customers in Zambia are somehow involved. It's about giving a business opportunity to the farmers, and we do it by making sure that they can sell all the milk they produce so that it's not lost, and to help them produce better quality so that it's fit for processing and is what the processors need and want, and to help them to reduce the cost of production, to make them more efficient. And I agree with Anna. When we saw the numbers mentioned here, comparing Sweden 1850 with today, we still have farmers around the world that are where we were 1850. So there's a huge opportunity to help them improve and make, which then will lead to higher profitability and people being attracted into that business. I visited a lot of dairy farms in Albania recently, and it was quite interesting to see that the sons and the children of these farmers actually joined these meetings because they were, sensing something is going to happen here. Maybe this would be of interest to me. Now when we're going to improve the situation, maybe this is actually a future for me to take over.
Yes, thank you very much. We got a couple of questions that regards ecological production, organic production, as well as agroecological production, both in Sweden and elsewhere. So I think that these questions are relevant for several of you, maybe Anna, Gustav, and also Elizabeth. Maybe like to Anna and Gustav, how can we Sweden support, like a bit of the question also regards like, why do we wait? Why aren't we supporting like a quicker transformation to an agroecological and more resilient agriculture through and together with the farmers organizations? So why wait? Like, what do we wait for? So Gustav, maybe you start.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I don't think we should wait, and I'm not sure we are waiting because we are actually supporting many of those initiatives, and not only in when it comes to food production, also, for example, during the recent desert locust outbreak in Eastern Africa, we've seen very interesting examples from Somalia, for example, where they have used organic methods or non-conventional pesticides to get rid of the locusts. So in many aspects of the work that we are already supporting, those aspects are already included. But then of course there is probably room for improvements. But I agree with you. We should not wait.
Good. Anna.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I don't think we're waiting either. I think we're promoting that as good as much as we can, but we need to do it together. But we can't do it on our own. So we need broader-based policies, and again, it goes back to it has to be easy to do the right thing, and part of that is making organic production also profitable. And I think, and that is at policy level and so on. And I think we need to work together to continue to promote, to make that not only the sustainable choice, but also the easy choice.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Anna. And the question, partly the same question, was also directed to you, Elizabeth. Like, how is LRF and especially LRF Youth Section working to get more young farmers into organic farming, or are you?
I think it's always about the profitability, what you make money off. And the question I get was a little bit about rekorings, like small scale selling on farms.
Yes.
And I think that's a good opportunity if you are young and want to have, and you can only buy a small farm to start with. This is one way to get profit on less hectares. But at the same time, we need a system that works both for small farmers that grow carrots, onion and potatoes, as well as we need a system that works for farmers who produce grains at 400, 500, 600 hectare fields, or you have 300 dairy cows. So we have all the types of members, and our goal is to make all those have profitability in their business. And I also think that we need to see that plant protection could be good as long as they're used in the right way. And of course, we need education to be able to do this. If you have all the harvest getting destroyed by a disease, if you're not using plant protection that year, maybe it could be good to use plant protection that year, but in the right way and the right amount of it. So I think that we need a system that works both for small producers, for big producers, if you produce grain or if you produce carrots.
Thank you very much. We got a couple of more questions, but we're also approaching the end of this seminar, and I think that we might be hungry also after all this talk about food. So I will invite Gustav to provide a couple of, I would not say make concluding, but final reflections, a couple of reflections on the debates, on what we discussed today, and on the presentations.
Okay, thanks. Even though the vision of a world without hunger in this time of massive global challenges may seem a bit overwhelming, maybe, I must say I'm happy to hear about all of those different perspectives and possible solutions being discussed in this seminar today. Take the school feeding, for example, and the very interesting presentation from Katarina. We know that food is crucial to keep children in school. We also know that keeping children and adolescents in school is critical to avoid other issues, such as sexual abuse, early marriage, violence at home, child labor. And Sweden is already supporting school feeding in many parts of the world, including support to WFP. But it was also very interesting to hear about the technological solutions, such as the digital information management system in Zambia, as this is getting more and more important, I think, both in production and harvesting, but also when it comes to resilience, as was discussed briefly by Maximo, and disaster risk reduction. And FAO is, for example, increasingly using technology to monitor global weather, ecological conditions, and again, currently the desert locust situation in Eastern Africa, where they are trying to use new satellite technology to monitor the situation. So I think technology is going to be, it's already here, but we need to find ways to use it in a proper way. And then, of course, I would also like to again highlight the role of smallholder farming and cooperatives shown in the video in the beginning and also discussed by Tibblin. When we're talking about food production, we must not forget that the majority of the farms in the world are still small, and farms of less than 1 hectare account for about 70% of all farms, but operate only 7% of all agricultural land. So there we have an issue, and smallholders play an essential role in ensuring food security and nutrition, but it also play an important role in creating employment, as mentioned by Maximo, reducing poverty, and of course, enhancing sustainable management of natural resources. So I think focusing on smallholders is key. Unfortunately, they are, however, often themselves affected by food insecurity and malnutrition, as around 80% of the world's food insecure are actually small-scale family food producers. So that's another issue. Finally, I totally agree with Per Callenberg and his initial remarks that this is really a time of transformation. And if we use this opportunity in the right way, I think we will be able to solve our time's biggest challenges and creating food systems that are sustainable. But also, as Maximo so well described, we also need to focus on creating resilient food systems to be able to manage all the challenges that we face today in terms of shocks. But with all those terrible consequences on health, well-being, livelihoods, and again, I think 2021 is likely going to be a very, very challenging year. We could still hope that the recovery after the COVID-19 pandemic could provide an opportunity to build back better, to ensure that our food systems do not solely focus on producing more food, but are sustainable, resilience, and deliver affordable, healthy diets for all, while leaving no one behind. So again, thank you to all for a very, very interesting seminar.
Thank you very much, Gustav. I think you managed to capture it all and summarize almost everything that was said in the seminar. So thank you very much for that. And I would just like to thank everyone in this seminar, the audience, and of course the speakers, and a special thank you also to SIANI that hosted the meeting and helped out with all the technicalities and practical issues of this meeting. And this thank comes on behalf of the Swedish FAO Committee organizing the seminar. And as I said, several questions were not responded to, and we will make our best to get replies and publish them on the SIANI website. So thank you very much to all of you. Have a nice Friday and a nice weekend. Bye.